next speaker is Joey Gurango, who some people call Mr. Software in Philippines. He has been with the software industry for his entire life, runs a regional operation, Gurango Software operation offices in Manila, Singapore, and Melbourne. He spends a lot of his time traveling around to different places. Been with the Philippine Software Industry Association for many years, most recently as president, and has done a lot to promote the industry over the years. One interesting thing is he's on the board of a company called Zurpass, who some of you might know. I don't know if you follow the capital markets, but they went public just recently. A fairly young management team, and Joey is on the board and has guided them. But it was the first, or one of the first, I think the first kind of big scale IPO in the software industry in the Philippines. And these young managers became, I would say, obscenely wealthy, and so it's very exciting. So it's really energized the whole industry, and now a lot of these smaller, younger companies are now saying, well, if Zurpass guys did it, we're going to do it too, and all this stuff. So I think you'll see a lot more happen with that in the future. So it's a very exciting thing. Another thing about Joey, which I tell, and sometimes I know he gets tired of me telling it, but in the early days, he worked for Microsoft when it was still a growing company. And he was one of the developers who created Microsoft Excel. And so some of the code that you use today was typed in by this guy right here. So just think about that when you're using Excel, and some of the code is Joey Gurango. So please welcome Joey Gurango to the stage, and let's hear about the software industry. Thanks, Joey. No, okay.
Just good morning. This is kind of an interesting situation because I normally do not address testing. I normally don't address crowds of what I call non-nerds, or otherwise known as normal human beings. So this is new for me. I thought I'd really go completely civilian by not using slides, and I won't even be using a PC. I'm actually using an iPad. So for my buddies at Microsoft, I'm sure they're going to be quite upset at the fact that today I'm using an iPad and not using PowerPoint. So I'd like to thank Richard for inviting me to speak at this very prestigious event. Just looking at the caliber of the speakers and the attendees kind of makes me wonder what I'm doing here. I must say that I'm not really sure what Richard thought I could add as far as some measure of prestige to this event, given that I only head up a small local 12-year-old software company called Gurango Software. And then he puts me on the program right after the likes of Mr. Reyes and Mr. Bisson, the country managers of Genpact and Cognizant, two of the largest employers of IT professionals in this country. And then when I'm done, he'll bring out Mr. Misra, who is the CEO of Hinduha Global Solutions, which is a company that employs thousands of employees. Certainly a Goliath compared to our David of a company. We have less than 100 employees. So I really need to ask what I'm doing here. Perhaps I'm your comic relief. Perhaps I'm expected to provide the entertainment this morning. Or perhaps I'm in charge of getting us back on schedule, since I can make the session as long or as short as I want to, and we are running a little bit behind schedule. But maybe it has something to do with the opening speaker, Dan Reyes, because besides heading up Genpact, Dan is also the chairman of IBPAP, IBPAP, the IT and Business Processing Association of the Philippines. While I am not part of the BP in IBPAP, I am certainly a part of the IT in that association's initials. So until recently, I was the president of the PSIA, or the Philippine Software Industry Association, an organization that operates under the umbrella of IBPAP. And I continue to serve that organization as a mentor for a group called Spring.ph, the software products incubation group of the Philippines, which I co-founded back in 2011, right before the local software startup scene exploded here in the Philippines. When we founded Spring.ph back in 2011, there were fewer than 100 software startups that we knew of in the country. Today, there are over 400, and it grows every month. In fact, the local startup ecosystem has already produced its first big internet success story. A few months ago, in December 2014, a small company called Surpass had its IPO at the Philippine Stock Exchange. Surpass is a mobile applications developer and publisher founded by a guy named Nix Noledo and some friends back in 1999. Now, back in December, 1.7 billion shares of Surpass stock were listed on the Philippine Stock Exchange at less than 4 pesos per share, at the time making Nix and his buddies paper multimillionaires. Today, with the stock trading at around 11 pesos per share, the value of their stake in the company has more than tripled, making them billionaires, at least on paper. So full disclosure, as Richard mentioned, I am on the board of Surpass. I'm not a founder, I'm not an employee, but I am a director of that company. But I digress, okay? My involvement with PSIA and Spring is driven by my intense interest and curiosity about the IT industry and how it impacts society in general. My professional involvement as an IT person began when I was still a student back in the late 70s at a school called Bellevue College in Washington State, USA. This was actually just a few miles away from another school that the founder of Microsoft was attending at the time in Washington State. I was hired as a contract programmer to build the software that automated our school's student election system in 1980. As far as I know, it was the first computerized student elections held in Washington State. It was my first paid programming gig, and I became hooked on IT. Oh, by the way, for some strange reason, most of the winners of that year's student elections were my friends. So maybe I should apply for a job at Smartmatic this year. Anyway, I did drop out of college in 1982 to go work as a product manager for a company called Apple Computer. I got to work with Steve Jobs on 2 spectacularly failed products called the Apple III, and after that, the Apple Lisa. Both spectacular failures. They were such bad products that when we finally terminated them, we dug a big landfill in Cupertino and put about 1,500 units of the computers in the landfill and covered it up. The reason we did that was if we had actually given away or tried to sell them even at really cheap prices, the tax impact would have been too much for the company to bear, so we just got rid of them. After the Lisa, I got the chance to be involved in the launch of another product, which today we know as the Macintosh. And that was a very successful product. I left Apple in 1984 to start working as a freelance programmer. And in 1987, I was contracted by a small company, small at the time, in Seattle called Microsoft, to work on a product that Bill Gates was hoping would challenge, at that time, a dominant market leader. The market leader was a spreadsheet product company called Lotus 123. The software product that we were building at Microsoft was called Excel for Windows. Just a footnote, most of you probably know this, but Excel first came out on the Macintosh. Excel was introduced for the Apple Macintosh in 1985, and Microsoft was under an agreement with Apple that they could not come out with the Windows version until at least 2 years after the Macintosh introduction. So we had to wait until 87 to start working on Excel for Windows. In 1987, Lotus 123 had a 90% market share of the spreadsheet market. There were a handful of other spreadsheets like VisiCalc, Symphony, and Wings, names you probably have never heard of. But these are all niche players, and Lotus 123 was the big Goliath at the time. Microsoft did have a product called Multiplan. And if you're familiar with that product, that really ages you. But that product wasn't very good. So after working on it for a year, we launched Excel for Windows in 1988. And the rest, as they say, is history. By 1991, Excel had an 80% share of the spreadsheet market. And of course, fast forward to today, let's see. How many people in this room use Excel on a regular basis? Show of hands. Okay. And how many people in this room use Lotus 123? Oh my gosh, I actually see a few people. Okay, so Lotus 123 is still alive in some parts of the world. The point I'm trying to make is that we're in an industry where fortunes change quite dramatically. In a 5-year span, a company that had a 90% market share went from 90% to almost nothing because of another product that did much better than what it did. Okay? So that same phenomenon still happens even today. Things change very quickly in our industry. 18 months is a long gestation period for any product, and there's always a new version coming out or a new competitor coming out every few months. So yes, my professional involvement in IT has spanned the last 35 years. And today, as part of my role in today's program, I'd like to share some of my insights on IT and perhaps how it might impact yourselves as individuals and the people in your organization. We are now in the latter stages of the latest technology wave. And there's been about 7 major technology waves since the 70s when it comes to IT. The latest wave is something called SMAC, and most of you have probably heard about it already. SMAC is an acronym for Social, Mobile, Analytics, and Cloud. And the cool thing about this is that Philippine society is right in the middle of this technology wave. See, back in the old days when I started out in technology and I'd moved back to the Philippines, I recognized that generally when it comes to technology, we were 18 to 24 months behind in adoption of technology. Back in the 90s, I had to go to the US and go to trade shows and see what was going on to kind of understand what might be happening a year and a half to 2 years later in the Philippines. I haven't gone to an overseas trade show in about 5 years because basically what's happening in the world technology is happening right here already. As a matter of fact, most of the really large companies like Google and Facebook and other companies of that like, they have offices here to observe and to study how Filipinos are using the technology so they can apply their learnings to other markets around the world. So we're not lagging behind anymore. With the SMAC wave, we're right on the cutting edge of this technology adoption. And that makes me very excited to be part of the local IT industry. Very excited. So what's this SMAC anyway? I mean, social. Okay, I'll ask for a show of hands. How many people here have a Facebook account? Don't be shy. How many people here are posting right now on their Facebook accounts? Okay, so it's not a secret anymore. The Philippines leads the world in social media adoption. Facebook, Twitter. There were more people voting via Twitter for American Idol last year from the Philippines than the United States. You know, if in fact the Philippine votes were counted, Jessica would have won. Okay, not the white guy. Okay, so but they weren't counting Philippine votes. They were only counting U.S. votes. So too bad. But Jessica, I thought, was the better competitor anyway. So that's social. Mobile, well, I don't even have to ask this, but I'm pretty sure everybody has a mobile phone. But that's not really the most interesting part of the mobile wave. The fact is there are now more mobile phones in the Philippines than there are people. We have over 200 million mobile phones in the Philippines. And what's our population? 110 maybe, at most. Okay. So there are more phones than there are people. And I'm sure quite a few of you here today have more than one phone. Okay. The other part of that, which is really interesting, is that the highest rate of adoption for smartphones in the world, we rank number 3 in the world at the highest rate of adoption, which means that by 2017, all of the statistics show that by 2017, 80% of all the mobile phone users in the Philippines will be using smartphones, and not those feature phones that don't have any real competing capability. In terms of analytics, how many of you regularly view Rappler? Look at Rappler, okay? Rappler has actually democratized the use of analytics. And by the way, besides Maria Ressa, the other founder of Rappler is also Nix Noledo. So he's been involved in quite a few of the technology startups here. But Maria has brought analytics to the masses by their mood meters, their surveys, and their self-service analytics that you can do on your own on the website. So this is very, very cutting edge when you compare it to how analytics is being delivered in other parts of the world. And finally, cloud. Okay, we're very fortunate to be in a country where there are no pre-existing data sovereignty laws. So basically, companies or even government agencies in the Philippines are actually allowed to use the cloud if they have, if they have a reason for doing it. For their applications, which in other countries like Australia would be very difficult to do because they do have data sovereignty laws that says that if you have data, it must reside physically somewhere in the country, and we don't have that here. So cloud adoption in the Philippines is actually occurring at a very high rate. Okay. So personal note, underlying this latest technology wave, I've observed are the same characteristics that have driven the IT industry in the last 50 years. And yes, IT as an industry is celebrating its 50th year this year. Okay? And I've come up with my own acronym for these characteristics. I can't really pronounce it, so I'll just spell it. So the acronym is FCS. FCS. FCS stands for faster, cheaper, smaller. Or if you don't like the way that sounds, you can call it FSC, faster, smaller, cheaper. This is basically the belief that everything that we being provided by the technology industry for our personal and our business use, these tools will allow us to do things in less time, in less space, and for less money. That is so counterintuitive to all other industries and what's happening in the rest of the world. Just think about it. Anything you want to do can be done in less time, in less space, and for less money. Can you imagine what would that mean if you wanted to buy say a Rolls Royce? What's a Rolls Royce cost? It's $100,000 or more. It's this huge car, and you don't want to go very fast with it. But if you apply that same thinking to a Rolls Royce, that means that in a few years you can buy a Rolls Royce for maybe $10,000, and it will be able to fit in a parking space, and it'll be able to go as fast as a Ferrari. Okay. Highly unlikely to happen, but that phenomena is happening in the IT industry today. Counterintuitive, but true. So let's take a look at and see how FSC, faster, smaller, cheaper, is actually happening. I don't want to belie anybody's age, but how many of you have ever used a modem? Okay, good. That makes you more than 40 years old. But if you've ever used a modem, you know how it worked, right? Like you plug into your computer, you take your phone, the rotary dialing kind, you put it on it, and you dial the number, and you hear the tone that sounds like a fax tone, right? And when you hear that tone, you're connected, so you hit enter and start communicating, okay? When we used to use modems, the data transfer rate was what? 9,600 baud, maybe if you were lucky, 52,000 baud, okay? If you've never heard the term baud before, it's because most of you today think of it in terms of megabauds or megabits. Back then, we didn't even have kilobits. So today, when I check Facebook on my mobile phone, the data transmission that's happening at that time is happening at 1,000 times faster than what it did back in 1990. So we're talking about faster. I remember having to send a file to Seattle, 1 megabyte file to Seattle via modem dial-up using CompuServe, and it took 17 minutes to send 1 megabyte. Today we do that in about 12 seconds, if that. Okay, we routinely post pictures that are close to a gigabyte in some cases. We routinely send files that are gigabytes, and it happens much faster today than it used to. Okay. Smaller. Okay, again, I don't want to belie anybody's age, but how many of you have ever used a mobile phone that weighed more than 5 pounds? Okay, back in 1991, my Motorola brick, as they called it, weighed 7.5 pounds. And that's because not only did it have a handset, but it came with a battery pack that you carried to work with it. So now you've got iPhones, and even the iPhone 6 and the Samsung Galaxies, that, tablets weigh less than that phone. Okay, so the devices are getting smaller. If you remember the old fax machines, they were as big as photocopiers, and now they're one function in a multi-function printer. Okay. And finally, cheaper. This is the part I really like, because in our industry, there is a ever-increasing pressure towards making everything free. The underlying philosophy is, let somebody else pay for it other than the consumer who is benefiting from it. Okay, so how many of you use Dropbox? Well, how many of you use Facebook? How many of you use Open Office? Okay. These are all free. They don't cost anything because they've found a business model that allows somebody else to pay for that product other than you, the consumer. We are the only industry in the world that allows this kind of business model to happen. It doesn't happen anywhere else. So if you want anything from the IT industry, find somebody who's building a business model that would allow you to get that something for free and have somebody else pay for it. Okay? So I see that I have almost succeeded in bringing us back onto schedule, not quite as successful as I thought I'd be. So I'd like to close on this. I told you I'm the comic relief, right? So in 3 minutes, we'll be only 15 minutes behind schedule. So I'd like to summarize my thoughts in this manner. If you think of any technology or any technology product that you'd like to see become better, whether it's too slow or too big or too expensive for your needs, just wait. Just wait. In a few months, or at most a couple of years, that same product will be available to you faster, smaller, and much, much cheaper, if not free, than you can get it today. How's that for a deal? Thank you very much.